Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Ayin Zion. We're actually already on Zion I'm a bet because daf Ayin Zion and Amud Aleph only had two lines. Um, and uh, uh, and because I Baruch Hashem have a bris out of town that I will be going to, God willing, tomorrow morning. We'll actually cover Ayin Ches as well today. So today's daf will be a double dip, a double portion. Yes, exactly, a double portion, firstborn portion. So yesterday we explained that Rabbi Shimon's statement in our Mishnah actually doesn't relate to the case that was immediately before it, but rather relates to a case that was actually in an earlier Mishnah. But often these Mishnayos really ran on, and so it's considered the first part of the Mishnah. And it was about a thief who steals an animal that has been sanctified as a sacrifice by its owner. So Rabbi Shimon explains that often, while ordinarily the obligation to pay dalit and hay, dalit or hay, is limited to where one steals from someone, mi'ish, and not from God, a sacrifice would still be considered theft from the owner, such that the thief would be liable for a dalit or hay if he sold or slaughtered the animal, if the owner has an obligation to replace the stolen sacrifice. So, for example, if the owner says that he commits himself to offer a sacrifice, so then if that first sacrifice that he sets aside dies or goes missing or is stolen, then he will need to bring another one. And so as a result, in that situation, Rabbi Shimon says, even though it technically belongs to God, because this person has responsibility if something happens to it, you're really stealing from him. And so as a result, you will be subject to the dalit or hay. So we then concluded our discussion yesterday by asking the following question. How could Rabbi Shimon make the thief liable for dalit or hay for slaughtering an animal set aside for a sacrifice? Isn't he the one? He's the one who says that a slaughter that is not fit for consumption is not considered a good slaughter, and it wouldn't trigger the 4 times and 5 times penalty. And presumably, this slaughter, the slaughter of an animal that has been dedicated to the Beit HaMikdash as a sacrifice, that how could you slaughter it? Presumably, we're talking about slaughtering it outside the Beit HaMikdash. You're not allowed to. It won't be kosher. It won't be a kosher animal if you slaughter it outside the Beit HaMikdash. So that's the question. And we offered 3 different answers. Reb Dimi said, no, the thief does slaughter it in the Beit HaMikdash. And he even slaughters it in the name of the original owner. And we said, well, in Zekin, if that case, maybe he shouldn't have to pay anything back because he effectively returned the item. And we said, no, he didn't actually return it, because then when it came to the blood of the sacrifice, that got spilled. So he didn't actually fulfill the obligation of the owner. And so that was answer number 1. Answer number 2 was Ravin in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And he said, no. He didn't slaughter it in the name of the original owner. He slaughtered it in his own name, but that would still be considered a valid slaughter. It just doesn't fulfill the obligation of the original owner. And so as a result, that's why he will not be subject. That is why the thief would be considered still subject to the prohibition, because he slaughtered it in a way that's proper, and he slaughtered the animal that belonged to the original owner. And so as a result, that's why Rabbi Shimon would say in this situation, even though the animal was dedicated to the Beit HaMikdash and dedicated as a sacrifice, the thief will still be liable. And then Reish Lakish said, no, we're not talking about a sacrifice in the Beit HaMikdash at all. We're talking about where the thief slaughtered a blemished animal. The animal ended up getting a blemish, so it was no longer fit for sacrificing in the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore it was okay for him to slaughter it outside the Beit HaMikdash, and that would still be considered a valid slaughter, even though you would also need to redeem it. But we saw basically, and we also, even though Rav Dimi and Ravin would say it's a valid slaughter, even though you still need to sprinkle the blood. And we saw that it's because Rabbi Shimon says that something that Kol HaOmed Lizrika Kizorik Dami, that anything that is set aside and ready to be sprinkled, it's as if it was already sprinkled, and anything that is set aside to be redeemed, it's as if it was already redeemed. So as a result, in all these situations, the slaughter is a valid slaughter, and that is why Rabbi Shimon would say that you are liable for the 4 times and 5 times. And so now the Gemara is going to wonder and explore the logic of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. In particular, we're going to explain why Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree with Reish Lakish and why Reish Lakish doesn't agree with Rabbi Yochanan. Now, one of them is a little bit more obvious, and that's what we're going to pick up with. So Bishlama, we're on the third line of Ayin Zayin Amabet, third word on the line. Bishlama Rabbi Yochanan lo Amar Rabbi Yoshima ben Lakish. It makes sense why Rabbi Yochanan, whether you say it's like Rav Dimi or Ravin, it's understandable why Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree with Reish Lakish. Because the Reish Lakish limits our Mishnah to only animals that have become blemished, and Rabbi Yochanan wants to interpret it as specifically even with respect to unblemished animals. So Ela Reish Lakish, my time alo Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So what's the reasoning of Reish Lakish? Why doesn't he agree with Rabbi Yochanan? So Amar Lach, Reish Lakish would tell you there's something else that's a problem, because he has a theory as to utvacho o micharo. The Torah tells us that you slaughtered it or you sold it. Now, kol heka de isel b'mechira isi b'tavicha. That the issue is that the only time that you will be liable for 4 or 5, if you actually slaughtered it or sold it, is if it was possible to do either slaughtering or selling. It's only when you could do either that it will be that you'll be liable. So let's talk about some examples. So isi b'tavicha, when it's subject to the law of slaughtering, kol heka de leza b'mechira, lesi b'tavicha. I'm sorry, kol heka de isi b'mechira, isi b'tavicha, kol heka de leza b'mechira, lesa b'tavicha. If you don't have the opportunity to sell it, so then it's going to be something that is whenever you have the opportunity to sell it, it will be subject to the law of slaughtering as well. And when you don't have the ability to sell it, it won't be subject to the law of slaughtering. And what is this situation, right? The situation that we're talking about right now is v'hani kodshim. When you have an animal that is still tamima, and it is ready to go to the Beis Hamikdash to be sacrificed, so there is no opportunity to exchange it, to sell it, to do anything with it. So when you have this animal that has been dedicated as a sacrifice, there is no opportunity to sell it. And so as a result, we will say that there's no tavicha either. And so if you had in fact gone into the Beis Hamikdash and done either what Rav Dimi said or what Ravin said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish would say no liability for dalet or hay, because you couldn't sell that animal. That animal wouldn't be saleable. And similarly, v'azulu taimayu, and both Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan follow their opinion, because again, Reish Lakish ties sale and slaughter, whereas Rabbi Yochanan says no, it doesn't make a difference. If you can sell it, it applies. Then the rule applies, and if you can slaughter it, the rule applies. Because we have the following example: Hamocher treifa l'divrei Rabbi Shimon. So, what if you were to sell a treifa according to Rabbi Shimon? Now, remember, Rabbi Shimon is the one who says that the slaughtering needs to make the animal edible, and here you're slaughtering a treifa, an animal that is expected to die soon, and as a result, it does not have it is not actually a kosher animal when slaughtered. So and Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv, Rabbi Yochanan would say that even though you have slaughtered an animal, you sold an animal that if you slaughtered it would not be kosher, Chayav, you're liable for the dalet or hay. The Reish Lakish Amar Patur, and Reish Lakish says no. because you couldn't possibly slaughter it, that's why we're not going to say that you're not going to be liable even if you sell it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, okay, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev, Afal Gav Delesi B'Tavicha. Rabbi Yochanan says that even though this animal couldn't be subject to slaughtering, according to Rabbi Shimon, because it's not kosher, easy b'mechira, it will still have the law of sale. But Reish Lakish Amar Kevin Delesi B'Tavicha, Lesi b'mechira. Okay, now Tosfos here asks a question that you may be thinking. I mean, it wasn't such an obvious question, but it was one that is an interesting one. Take a look at the little Tosfos near the very bottom of the lines in the Gemara. Kol heicha de isi v'mechira isi b'tavicha umocher b'Shabbos. Well, what about if you sell it on Shabbos? Because according to Reish Lakish, right, if you were to slaughter it on Shabbos, you would not be able to eat it. You would actually not be subject to the 4 or 5 because you'd be subject to the death penalty. Right. And we have kimle b'diyah. So, and yet we would say that if you sold it on Shabbos, which although is a prohibition, we don't do business on Shabbos, it's only a rabbinic prohibition. And so as a result, you would be subject to the 4 or 5 times penalty. Even though if you were to have slaughtered it on that day, you would be exempt. But the reason is because that same animal could have been slaughtered on a weekday and you would be okay. Whereas if the animal itself is a treifa, well, then it doesn't make a difference when you were to slaughter it. It would never be okay. So that's an interesting ha'ara from Tosfos. So now Rabbi Yochanan is going to challenge Reish Lakish's opinion and say, hey, I don't think you're right. And I'm going to cite to you a brisa that shows that you're not right. So Esvei Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and in the end, by the way, we're going to say that it's not a definitive proof for Rabbi Yochanan, but it's a good proof for Rabbi Yochanan. So Esvei Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Ganav Kilayim Utvacha, if you steal an animal that is a crossbred animal, and then you slaughter it, Uterefa Umachara, or if you steal a treifa, an animal that has some kind of deformity, some kind of problem with it that is going to die within the year. So then Mishalim Tashlumi Arba v'Chamisha, you are still going to pay the 4-time or 5-time penalty. Now, the truth is that it doesn't make a difference whether you slaughter or steal the kilayim, the crossbred animal. That could you could do either of those two and you'd still be liable. But the treifa, it's only liable if you sell it, because my love Rabbi Shimon. So doesn't this brisa follow Rabbi Shimon, who limits us to the fact that only if it's kosher when you were to slaughter it would you be liable? And that's why specifically the end of this brisa references selling and not slaughtering, because if you were to slaughter the treifa, you would not be subject to the 4-time or 5-time penalty. Alma afal gav which shows that even though a treifa is not subject to slaughtering and penalty, it is subject to the sale and penalty. So Amar Le, Reish Lakish would say back, no, Rabbanan, it's the rabbis. The rabbis, remember, are the ones who say that it doesn't make a difference if when you slaughter it, the animal is not edible. The Torah just references slaughtering. You could slaughter it for any kind of reason and you'd be liable. So treifa b'mechira isa b'zvicha leisa. One second. So Irabanan, Treva b'mechira isa b'zvicha leisa. Well, 1 second. If you say it's the rabbis, well, then why are we only referencing mechira with respect to a treifa? Even zvicha, even if you were to slaughter the animal, you would still be subject to the 4-time or 5-time penalty. The Elamai Rabbi Shimon. So 1 second, Reish Lakish says back, oh, you want to say it's Rabbi Shimon? Well, 1 second, Kalayim b'tavicha isa b'mechira leisa. But when we talked about the Kalayim, when they talked about the case of the crossbred animal, and we reference slaughtering it, that implies slaughtering yes and selling no. But that's not true. Even Rabbi Shimon would agree that slaughtering a crossbred animal would still result in your being liable. Ella tana tvicha. So why didn't it teach both the sale and the slaughter? And we say the same thing applies to sale. So and so we could say the same thing with respect to the crossbred, that just as the beginning of our brisa left out slaughter, the end of our brisa left out sale. I'm sorry, just as the beginning of this brisa left out left out sale, so the end of the brisa left out slaughter. So Emel Rabbanan Nami, Tanam Bechira Behua Din Latvika. Exactly as I was just saying, that so too according to the rabbis, they taught the Mechira, and the same thing could be with respect to slaughter. So for Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lach, second, Rabbi Yochanan would say, "Hi, my, what kind of comparison is this?" Amra Bishlam Rabbi Shimon. When you talk about according to Rabbi Shimon, Aidi de Tana Trefa Bechada, Tana Kalayim Bechada. Well, since in the end case, when it talks about the treifa, there is only one way for the animal to be subject to the liability of the 4 times and 5 times, and that is if you were to sell it. But so too, when we talk about kalayim, we only mention one case. Eli amrat rabbanan. But if you tell me it's according to the rabbis, narvinhu v'nisninhu, mix them up, mix them together, and teach them together. Ganav kalayim utreifa, whether you steal a kalayim, a crossbred animal, or a treifa, or an animal that is subject to dying within the year because of some kind of physical deformity. So tvachan u'macharan. So then, whether you slaughter them or you sell them, mishalim tashlumi arba b'chamisha, you should pay the 4 times or 5 times penalty. And kasha, this is really a good question. We don't have a great answer for why we would say that we would focus on slaughter with respect to the hybrid, with respect to the crossbred animal, and sale with respect to the treifa. Why not just say that both are subject to both to the 4 times and 5 times penalty, whether you slaughter them or sell them? So that's where the Gemara ends on this, and so that's the story. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to the Brisa mentioned the possible 4 times or 5 times penalty for slaughtering a crossbred animal. So the Gemara asks to understand what kind of situation are we talking about. So Kalayim se ksiv, that when it comes to crossbred animals, the Torah references se, and Amar Rava ze bana'av, that this reference to se teaches us in a general sense that kol makom shenemar se einu elo lahotzi es haklayim. It is going to tell you that you cannot have that there would be an exclusion of liability for crossbred animals. So we're going to eventually say, hey, what's the situation? But before we do that, we're asking the question, if Rava makes that statement, why are we in this case? We just said that according to Rabbi Shimon, you could be liable for a crossbred animal, and we have written in connection with the payment of the 4 times or 5 times penalty, because it says to yignov ish sor oseh utvacho mecharo. That's in Shmos Parakaf Aleph Pasuk Lamed Zayin. And so as a result, how come Rava's rule doesn't apply here? Rava's rule is that you exclude liability for a crossbred animal. So Shiny Hacha de Amakra O Larabos as a climb. So here, because it says, as I read, shor oseh, it doesn't say shor viseh. So as a result, that teaches us that it's that if you are that it also includes something else. Well, second, are you going to tell me now, based on that learning, that every time the Torah says or and not the, it's going to say it's going to be an inclusive thing? V'hatanya, we have another situation, shor o kesev, where we have a brisa that teaches with respect to what animals can be brought as a sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash. We say shor os kesef, that either an ox or a lamb. prat l'klayim, and we say explicitly in this brisa that it excludes a crossbred animal. O's prat l'nidme, and we say that it also says or a goat, and then we say that it comes to exclude also an animal that is that nidme here is translated as mutant, but Rashi actually does a nice job for us and explains what it means by that. We take a look at Rashi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 lines up from the bottom of the narrow lines in Rashi. It's what we mean by its appearance is it doesn't appear, it doesn't look like either its father animal or its mother animal. Sheba me'ayil v'rechel, that it will have come from sheep, the domel a's, and yet it looks like a goat. So it's essentially, so that's what it means by a mutant. It has an altered appearance.
What do we call the crossbred between a goat and a sheep?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't. And I'm sorry that Charlie's not with us because he would know and he would tell us what it's what the details are and whether or not it's even possible. All right, but in any event, the point is that we've now shown that here we're using the word O as a method of exclusion. And you just told me that O is a method of inclusion. So Amarava Hakama Aina Anyane Kra. No, you have to look at the Rava explains that you have to look at the context of the verse. Vahacham Inyane Dekra. And here you look at the context of the verse. Haka Gabi Geneva Dixiv Shor Ose Shi Atayachol Lahotzi Kalayam Ibnehem. That when it comes to a shore or a se, there, those two animals, when they're listed together, apparently an ox and a se is not capable of creating a hybrid animal. A lamb and an ox can't make a hybrid. O l'rabas climb, and therefore the O comes to include. But gabi kodshim diksiv kesev be'ez, where it says a lamb and a goat, where apparently a lamb and a goat does have the ability to create a hybrid. So therefore, that's why it comes to exclude. So the point is, if the pasuk itself has some aspect of suggesting the inclusion of the keseh of the hybrid of the crossbred animal, then the word O will come to exclude it. And if you would never have thought to include the crossbred animal, then the O will come to include come to include the crossbred animal. Again, if the crossbreeding is possible, then the O would come to exclude, and if it's not possible, then the O/or would come to include. So in second, nami namar shor o kesev, because remember it said shor o kesev o a's. So why are you focusing on the last pair? Again, an ox and a lamb does not have the possibility of creating a crossbred animal, unirabe, and yet, so shouldn't we include a hybrid as a result? Based on the first teaching that you had, no, well, since it references, since in the second reference of kesev o a's, that is coming to exclude, we're going to also use the O in connection with the first part to also exclude. Well, one second, adarabba, medaresha larabos, seifanami larabos. You should go the opposite direction. Once we have the first part of that verse where it says shor o kesev, which it says before kesev, because it says shor o kesev o a's, so why not say that the first part tells us to include, so we should also include with the last part. So high my, well, one second. It's not a parallel situation because because if you want to come to exclude l'mayit who the itzrich trey l'muute, we have two needs to exclude because the first thing that we're going to exclude is the crossbred animal, but the second thing that we're going to exclude the avagav to imoid climb, because once you exclude the crossbred animals, it's nidma. You also need to exclude the animal that has the wrong appearance. Why is that one the less likely to be excluded because it has two proper parents. There was nothing wrong with their having the relationship. It just happened to look a little different, the child. Ella e amrit larabos. But if you tell me that you're going to come to exclude Trey ribuye lama, hashta kalayim irabile, nidme boy. But when you come to include, there are only two things to include. And the first thing we're going to include is the kalayim, because that's the nature of the pasuk. The pasuk is talking shor o kesev, and since there's no possibility of kalayim between them, we're going to say that it includes kalayim. And once you include kalayim, of course, a nidme, of course, the animal that has that different appearance is going to already be included. It has proper parentage, so there's no reason to have a second inclusion. So that's why we have to have, once we have two lessons to learn. Since we can't learn two inclusions, it must be to tell us two exclusions. Elahada Amar Rava. Okay, so now that we've explained that there must be two exclusions, so now we go back to Rava's original teaching. And where was it that Rava taught that teaching? Because we're going to see that almost every place where the Torah says seh, and even places where the Torah doesn't say seh, we'll see that we have a basis to exclude kalayim, to exclude a crossbred animal that doesn't require the binyan av that Rava taught. So Elahada Amar Rava Zebana Av Kol Makom Shenamar Se Enu Elo Lahotzi Esa Kalayim, that which when we said that Rava said that that there's a binyan av, that anywhere where it says se, we're going to say that it excludes a hybrid animal. Lamai Hilchasa, where was it taught? Because Ila Kachim, when it comes to animals that you offer as a sacrifice, behedjiksiv behu shoro kesef. We already saw that it says an ox or a lamb, and we said prat leklayim, and that comes to exclude a hybrid, a crossbred animal. And ilamaser, if you want to tell me that we're talking about meiser behema, remember meiser behema is the idea where all the animals that were born in a particular year are set aside, and you go through them, and every 10th one you bring as a sacrifice. So tachas yalaf mikadshim. Well, there we have exeris shava, because the Torah tells us the word tachas in both places. Now Rashi here points out that actually, first of all, even though it says meiser, Rashi tells us it's meiser behema, and second, Rashi notes that actually it does not say the word seh in connection with meiser behema. It only says the word sown by meiser behema, and so we might have thought, but nonetheless, we might have thought that we could still include this lesson. And the point is that we don't even need the lesson in this situation. And finally, Ila Bechor, if you want to tell me that it's to tell us that when it comes to the firstborn animal that you need to give to the Kohen, and the Kohen needs to bring as a sacrifice, ha'avara yalaf meiser. We have a Xereshava from Meiser, that both in connection with Bechor and in connection with Meiser, it uses the phraseology of ha'avara, that there's some kind of passing. So as a result, in an inami nidma amrat lo, or alternatively, when it comes to Bechor, we can say that here's the reason that you can't bring a crossbred animal. Dixiv ach Bechor shor, that we say only the firstborn of an ox. Achiahe hu shor ubecharo shor, that we need to have a shor, and the animal has to be a shor, meaning that there has to be both actual and that the child both have to be considered part of the same species. So kilayami boy, and so as a result, if you can't use even an animal that doesn't look like a shor, well then of course you're not going to be able to use a crossbred animal. So elaki itmar de Rava. So where did Rava say his statement? Here's where Rava stated his statement. Inyan Peter Chamor. When it comes to the redemption of a firstborn donkey, because what do you do with this firstborn donkey? You redeem it on a particular another kind of animal that you can then bring as that can be then given to the Kohen and brought as a sacrifice. Because it's not because we're going to now teach the lesson that shows that you can't use a crossbred animal to redeem a donkey, a firstborn donkey. Ain podin, we don't redeem a firstborn donkey. Lo be'egel, not with a calf. Lo b'chaya, not with an undomesticated animal. Lo b'shchuta, not with an animal that's already been slaughtered. Lo b'trefa, not with an animal that's about to die. Below b'kalayim, and not with a crossbred animal. Below b'koi, and not with a koi. A koi is an animal that is sort of like an in-between animal that we're not sure whether it's considered a wild animal, an undomesticated animal, or a domesticated animal. Here it suggests that it's actually got it is a combination of like a goat and a deer. It's a high. It's also a crossbred animal between a wild animal and a not and a domesticated animal. Rabbi Elazar, well, 1 second. What about Rabbi Elazar, who allows Klayim? Now, this is an interesting question because, of course, Rabba is an Amora and Rabbi Elazar is a Tana, and so there's no reason Rabba could just paskin not like Rabbi Elazar, but we want Rabba's explanation to also work to according to everybody. Ditnan Rabbi Elazar matir b'klayim mibnei shehu seh, that Rabbi Elazar says that you can bring klayim as a set, as it's called a set. So as a result, what would Rabba's law be coming to exclude? Remember, we just said that Rabba was telling us that you can't use a crossbred animal to redeem a donkey, but Rabbi Elazar says you can use that. So what would Rabba say according to Rabbi Elazar? So Amar Lach Rabbi Elazar would tell you, Ki Itmer de Rabba, where was it that Rabba's binyan av was stated? L'tamei shenolad min hatahor v'ibura min hatamei. That when it comes to an animal that was not kosher, that was born from a kosher animal that was impregnated by a non-kosher animal. That this is that what it tells us is that the child of this animal is going to be considered non-kosher. Udalok Rabbi Yoshua, and this does not follow Rabbi Yoshua. Now we're going to talk about in 2 seconds what is that example of the case that we were just saying. So the Rabbi Yoshua miseh ksavim v'seh izim nafgalei. Well, and that wouldn't work according to Rabbi Yoshua because Rabbi Yoshua learns that this kind of animal is already prohibited based on the fact that we say that the Torah says a sev lambs and a sev goats. So aviv keves ve'imo kavsa, that you need the two parents to be the same animal. So as a result, it wouldn't work to have a non-kosher animal and a kosher animal have relations and have a child. Well, 1 second. Can you even have a kosher animal conceived from a non-kosher animal? And the answer is yes. And what's the situation? To Kaimalan, as we turn to Ayin Chedem Abet, the Abed Mikalot Karebi Shimon. We're talking about a situation where one of the parents has uncloven hooves. Now, if we remember that the kosher animal simanim are cloven hooves and chewing cud. So we're not going to worry about the chewing cud, but we're dealing with a situation where, for whatever reason, the animal that ordinarily would have cloven hooves is a different structure. It's a mutant, as we said. And so as a result, according to Rabbi Shimon, such an animal, even though it should be kosher for all purposes, it just, for whatever reason, it had some kind of birth defect and it didn't have the kosher symbols, it's going to be considered not kosher. And so as a result, what we're learning is that the child of that animal, that according to Rabbi Elazar, that is what Rabba is talking about when he says that the word seh comes to exclude a crossbred animal. That this crossbreeding of a non-kosher animal with a kosher animal will be considered crossbreeding to constitute a that the animal that is produced is not kosher. So by Rabba, hare alai ola. So now Rabba asks a question. If a person commits to bring an ola, and now the heifer is short, and he actually separates an ox, he's offering basically the most expensive kind of ola, because remember, an ola is all for Hashem. He's not going to get to eat any of it. Uva achar v'ganim. And now somebody else came to steal it. And we're talking about according to Rabbi Shimon. So there's going to be an obligation to, and there's going to be liability, or actually we could even be talking about according to the rabbis, and there's going to be liability for the original. And we're going to assume for the moment that the original animal, stolen animal, is no longer around, because if the original animal still exists, so then the thief would certainly have to return that animal. So now what happens is mipater ganav nashe becheves l'rabbanan uba'olas ha'of l'Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. Would it be okay for the thief to return an animal? Remember that really the thief has not stolen from the person who's offering the sacrifice, because the sacrifice has been set aside, so it belongs to God. So, but we want the person to return the item. But now this person who's been stolen from, he is going to have to replace his sacrifice, because now that animal, that ox, was gone. So do we allow the thief to say, you know what? Listen, you don't need to bring another ox. You can bring a according to the rabbis, you could bring a lamb, and according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, you can bring a bird. If somebody says that they're committing to bring an ola, yavi keves. So, according to the Kamma, which is of course the rabbis, you could bring a lamb, meaning you don't have to bring an ox. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer yavi tor o ben Yona. You could bring a bird, a turtle dove, or a young dove. So what's the law? Mi amrina and shame Ola Kabil Ilave. Do we say that all that matters is the name Ola? O Dilma Matzi Amr, or do we say that look, the person who dedicated the animal can say to the thief, Amrlay, Ana mitzvah mina muvkar beina I was trying to do the best possible mitzvah. So you should allow me, you should enable me to do that by giving me back the animal that I was dedicating. So Basar de Iboy Hadar Pasha. So as a result, Rava thought about it, and then after he asked the question, he answered it. Ganav Hatar Atzmo Bekeves L'Rabbanan Ba'olas Ha'of L'Rabbi Elazar Ben Azariah. Really, he can do it. It is okay to give back the lesser animal. That it's okay to enable the offering. Now, some people try to expand this lesson to beyond the sacrifice, to say maybe if I stole your esrog and you had a really nice esrog, I should be able to return a less nice esrog. I don't buy it. I don't think that to me that, because the question here is, the point is that this animal doesn't belong to the person. The only reason that there is any liability to the person on some level is because he has committed himself, so he has personal liability. So the question is what is that personal liability set him up for? And so as a result, that's why I think this case is unique and would not follow other cases. But there are, I'm who am I to disagree with Rishonim and Achronim? But in any event, Rav Acha Breidu Rav Ika Masni Lebehedge, and Rav Acha Rav Ika, he taught that original statement basically as a specific ruling. Amarava Hare Alai Ola V'Hifra Shor Uva Achar Ugnavo Patar Atzma Bekevis L'Rabbanan Uva Olos Ha'ov L'Rabbi Elazar Ben Azariah. That if in fact somebody commits to offer an ola, and a fully burnt offering to Hashem, and he sets aside an ox, and then somebody steals it, and now that animal doesn't exist any longer, and he wants to try and pay back the guy, it is okay for him to pay back with a sheep, or with a lamb, or a bird, according to Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. So our next Mishnah continues this concept of what were the exceptions for the 4 times and 5 times penalty. So let's take a look. So all of these are going to be exceptions. So exception number 1, we'll see at the very end, we'll see that it's an exception to the 4 times and 5 times penalty. If you sell 99% of the animal, you sell 100% minus 1%. Or if the original owner was a partnership and you steal from your partner, or or you slaughter it, and when you slaughter it, it becomes a nevela. or hanocher v'hama'aker, or you slid it, you don't do a proper slaughtering at all. You do it in a way that it essentially makes it an avela automatically. Again, the first case is where wasn't avela intentionally, but you ended up having it being an avela. So in all of those cases, mishalim tashlumi kefel, you only pay double. Ve'ena mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. You're not going to pay the 4 times or 5 times. So okay, so my chutz me'echad nemeya shabo. What's the case when we say that if you exclude 1%, you're going to be liable? So Amar Rav, chutz midavar hanitar imo b'shchita. It's talking about when you exclude something that the only reason that it's permitted to consume or to be permitted to deal with is because you shechted it. Meaning the point is that the shechita has to be important with respect to the 1% that you are holding back. The Levi Omer, Levi says, no, it doesn't make a difference what you hold back. Chutz megizo seha, even if you hold back the wool, that's going to be a problem, the shearings. And we actually have a brisa that seems to say along these lines. But actually, this brisa is going to be a problem. We have a brisa that says chutz megizu seha, that in fact that is like Levi that says except for the shearings. And now we're going to quote a full brisa, and we'll see that we have a real problem because we don't have an opinion that matches Rav. Meisvei. If you sell it except for the hand, meaning the front leg, a front leg, chutz miragla, or one of its back legs, chutz mikarna, except for its horn, chutz miguzoseha, except for its shearings, ena misham tashlumi arba v'chamisha. Well, that's the Tanakama. That Tanakama is Levi. That says that basically if you exclude anything, it's going to be you've sold 99%, you haven't sold the whole thing, and as a result, you are not going to be liable. Rebbe Omer, davar hama'akev b'shchita. Anything that's a part of the animal that if it wasn't there, we would say, you know what, this animal cannot possibly be kosher, and so as a result, you would as a result, when you exclude it, you would be exempt from the 4 times or 5 times. Specifically, we will see Rashi helps explain it, that this is talking about where you are missing a whole leg, for example. If you were to miss just the bottom part of the leg, then Rebbe would say, listen, if the animal is missing the bottom part of the leg, it can survive that way. And so as a result, the shchita is a valid shchita. So, of course, that leg, if that leg got cut off, you wouldn't be able to eat that leg that got cut off before the shchita, but the animal that remained would be still kosher. So, so in all those cases, in that situation, you don't pay the 4 times or 5 times. But if it's something that is not essential for shchita, like the bottom part of a foot or something like that, so then mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. If you exclude that, well, then you would still pay the 4 times or 5 times penalty. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, chutz mikarna, if you exclude the horns, eina mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. The horns you would are sufficiently important to the animal, presumably because it doesn't grow back, as we will see shortly. So, but if you exclude the shearings, so we see now that we have these 3 different opinions, and none of them are like Rav. We have the opinion that basically the Tanakama, which says that basically you exclude anything, you only pay double. You can see in the chart here on the screen. Or Rebbe, who says that you're going to pay 4 times or 5 times, with the only exception being if you're like missing the whole leg, which is necessary for shchita. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was the one who said that basically, does it grow back? If it doesn't grow back, well, then the horns, the bottom of the leg, the whole leg, doesn't make a difference. In all those situations, you're going to pay 2. You're not going to pay 4 times or 5 times. But Rav's position was shearing, you pay 4 times or 5 times, and horns, you pay 4 times or 5 times, because those are not kosher as a result of the slaughtering. It's only the aspects of the leg that you would have to, whether it's the bottom of the leg or the whole leg, that you would have to pay the 2 times. So where is that? So Bishlam and Levi Tanakama. Levi holds like the Tanakama. El Rav, come on. Who does Rav hold like? So Amri, Rav de Amr Kahai Tana. Rav says like the following Tana to Tanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Mechara chutz mi yada, chutz mi ragla, eno mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. That if you miss any part, miss the leg, so then you're going to pay 4 times or 5 times. chutz mikarna, and chutz mizuseha, if you're missing the horn or the shearings, mishalam tashlim arba v'chamisha. And we understand this as meaning even if you're missing part of the leg, then it would, and that therefore matches Rav. And so as a result, we now have a Rav, a Tana that holds like Rav. Well, 1 second, but my kamivlagi, Tana Kamma. So what are they all arguing about? So, and you'll, if you're wondering, well, 1 second, we had Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar up above as well, and this shows two different views of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. We'll get to that in a moment. So first, what are they arguing about? So I listed already these points as subpoints on the screen, but we'll see. So Tanakama Savar Utvacho Kulo Be'inan Umacharo Kula Be'inan. That when it comes, the Tanakama says, listen, when you slaughter the animal, it implies that you're slaughtering the entire animal. And so too, when you sell the animal, it implies that you're selling the entire animal. You leave anything out, you're going to not be subject to the 4 times or 5 times penalty. But Rabbi Savar utvacho midi dahavi b'tavicha. When Rabbi says no, slaughtering doesn't mean that you're slaughtering the entire animal. It means anything that you need in order to slaughter it. La puki midi delo havia b'tavicha. That implies anything that you don't need to slaughter is not going to problem. Umachara dumya tavicha. And again, slaughtering and selling are comparable to one another. And so as a result, if you exclude a body part like the bottom of the leg, so then that's okay because that isn't necessary for the slaughtering. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Savar, and the first opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, "Karna de lo migza kaima." A horn isn't for shearing, meaning you're not supposed to cut it off and have it grow back because it's not going to grow back. So havi shear, so that constitutes an exclusion. So ve'ena mishalim tashluma arba v'chamisha, and so therefore you won't pay the 4 times or 5 times. But gizoseha Dilamiga's kaimi, but when it comes to the shearings, which are ready to be cut off, lo habi shiur, that's not an exclusion. So umisham tashlum arba b'chamisha, so you should pay 4 times or 5 times. The idach tani debei Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar sabar. And what about the second view of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? He says yada v'ravlav de tricha tvicha. What matters is, do you need to have the slaughtering in order for it to be kosher? So if you need it to be slaughtered in order for it to be kosher, habishir. So if you exclude that, that's considered an exclusion. Below masham tashlumi arbe v'chamisha, and so therefore you won't pay 4 times or 5 times. But karneha v'gizuseha delo tzricha tvicha lo habishir. But when it comes to the horn and the shearings, which don't require slaughter for them to be used because they're not actually consumed, they're not eaten. So as a result, you would be allowed to to exclude them, and it wouldn't constitute an exclusion that would eliminate the obligation for 4 times and 5 times penalty. So in second, Kasha de Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, we have 2 different views of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Well, yeah, that's okay because Trey Tanai Valiba de Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. We have 2 Tanaim that say like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Now we're going to do a little bit further because again, I don't want to. So apologies for going a little bit late, but we'll just get to the 2 dots near the bottom. So Tana Rabbanim. So the rabbi says, so we're going to have 2 different interesting first a conflicting brisa, and then an interesting question that will set us up nicely for God willing Motzi Shabbos. So Tana Rabbanim. Hagonev hakitaas. If you steal an animal that was amputated, the es hachigeres, or a lame animal, the es hasoma, or a blind one, or you steal an animal that belongs to partners, chayiv. In all those cases, you're going to be liable if you then do sell it or slaughter it. So ushutafim shigadnvu. However, when you have 2 partners who steal, peturim, they are going to be exempt. Well, 1 second, v'hatanya shutavim shiganvu chayavim. Well, 1 second, we have another brisa that says that when 2 partners steal and then slaughter or sell the animal, they're going to be liable. How do we understand this inconsistency? So Amar Rav Nachman first tries to answer lo kasha kan b'shutav shegana mechavero kan b'shutav shegana me'alma. No, the question is did the partners steal from one another? That's where you're going to be exempt because you already owned part of it, so you didn't steal the entire animal. And in the other case where the 2 partners steal from a third party, well, then together they stole the whole animal. So as a result, they'll be liable. Well, in second, Isve Rava lo Rav Nachman. Rava asks Rav Nachman, I don't understand because we have another brisa that shows that that can't be the distinction that we're talking about here, because we have another brisa that says Yachos. I might have thought Shutaf Shagana Mechavero Shutafim Shagandu Yehu Chayavim, that I might have thought that when a partner steals from another partner, or two partners steal together from a third party, they would be liable for 4 times and 5 times. Talmud Lomer Utvacho. We learned that he slaughtered it. So Kula B'ina, we need the entirety, the Leica, and in this case there isn't. So here we have a brisa that is very clearly a situation where 2 partners steal an animal, and yet we're seeing that they're not liable. So we have one brisa that the 2 partners who steal are liable, and we have another that says 2 partners that steal are not. Ella Amar Rav Nachman lo kasha. Kan b'shutav shetavach l'das chavero, kan b'shutav shetavach l'shalo l'das chavero. So the question is did the thieves steal? Did the thieves slaughter the animal with the, obviously only one person of the 2 thieves slaughtered the animal? Did he do so with the consent of the other? That this, according to Rashi, is an exception to the rule of Ein Shliach Ledvar Aveira. And we'll say that this is a situation where we would say, yes, Shliach Ledvar Aveira, that there is that the one partner can be the representative of the other partners to slaughter it. And we will say that, therefore, if he has permission from the other partner, so then they'll have to pay 4 times and 5 times. But if he does not, and he slaughters it on his own, so then he would not. So by Rebbe Yirmiyah, final question. What if you exclude, we talked about some exclusions, we said excluding 1%. Well, what if we exclude the animal for 30 days? We sell the animal, but we exclude it for 30 days. Or chutz mimalachta, or we exclude the animal, but we say, but the work, that I will retain the ability to work the animal. Or chutz miubara, or I exclude the animal and I say that, but I'm going to keep the child of the animal, the fetus, still belongs to me. So Mahut, what is the story? Aliba Daman to Amar Uber Yerach Imo who will Tibaila. Now, if you were to say that a fetus is like the mother's thigh, so of course there's not a question. Daha Shireba. Of course, you're excluding a part of the main animal, so that's not even an issue. Kiti Bailach, where am I going to ask you about the pregnant animal? Aliba demand de Amar de Uber Lab Yarachimo. According to the view that a fetus is not like the a part of the mother. So what's the story? Meimar Amrinan Kevin de Mechuber Ba Havishir. Do we say that because they're attached, it's considered part of the mother? Odilma came into Mefarsh because it's supposed to be separated. Lo Havishir. It's not considered a real exclusion. So 2 views. Another view of the question of how to phrase the question. Or do we say, listen, it's just not the mother's thigh and another part of the mother, and therefore lo havishir, it's not considered like something that's being excluded. O dilma kaven de tzarach ishtaruye bahada b'shchita. Or do we say, no, look, if in fact the mother, while the fetus is inside her, is slaughtered, that fetus is edible. It is kosher to eat that fetus. So do we say, therefore, command shire begufa dummy? Do we say that therefore it's considered part of the excluded items? And we answer teku. We don't have a definitive answer. It is unresolved, and therefore, of course, we shouldn't do any of this because we shouldn't be stealing. But in any event, the point is that the liability presumably would therefore be only the double and would not include the 4 times and 5 times, because again, it's a financial liability. And so as a result, we would say presumably hamotzi mechavero al haraya. Now, if you're interested in more questions like this about what's considered exclusion, then you should definitely stay tuned for the next stop, which will, God willing, we'll learn on Motzi Shabbos. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. It is possible, by the way, that the Motzi Shabbos daf will be a recording that will be circulated presumably on Sunday morning. So stay tuned, keep an eye out for your WhatsApp, and I look forward to continuing our learning, God willing, next week.
What's the
hello? Go ahead.
Yep. Yeah. In the first if you could just clarify briefly, I think I got lost a little bit in the first discussion on the end of the let's
Daf Ayin
Zion where the discussion between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish.
Yep.
I just got lost between Reb Shimon. I thought the machloka was between Reish Lakish and Reb Yochanan, and we were referring to the opinion of Reb Shimon, and but
Okay,
Reb
so
Shimon is Reb Shimon ben Lakish, so I was a little bit
no,
confused.
no. Rabbi Shimon is the Rabbi Shimon that we're referring to is Rabbi Shimon.
Ben Lakish.
No. The
What?
Rabbi Shimon in that discussion is Rabbi Shimon Atana, and it's that Tana who says there's a separate machlokes that Tana has with the rabbis as to the nature of the slaughter in connection with the being liable for Dalet Evehe. That if, in fact, the slaughter doesn't result in a kosher animal, then, according to Rabbi Shimon, the Tana, then it's not going to be a valid situation, a valid slaughter, and therefore you are not going to be liable for Dalet Vehe. Now, the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish was what's the situation? Well, the machlokas between Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish was well, there were two machlokot, but the thing that got us there is what's the situation where you could have a valid slaughter of when you steal an animal that has been dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash and have it be a valid slaughter according to Rabbi Shimon, so that because we're talking about the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, we're within Rabbi Shimon's opinion in our Mishnah, right? Rabbi Shimon was, if we take a look back at Ayin Dalet Amabet, you'll see at the end of the Mishnah on Ayin Dalet Amabet, you'll see where it says Rabbi Shimon Omer Kachim Shechaya Ba'akuryusim Misham Tashlumi Arba Vehe She'ein Chaya Ba'akuryusim Pater. And we've explained that the situation Rabbi Shimon is talking about is if you steal an animal that the owner has already said is going to be a sacrifice. So if that sacrifice is one that he has responsibility for, so then you're going to be liable for the Dalet Vehe.
Right.
And if you don't have liability, so now within that, both Rabbi Yochanan and Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, are arguing about what is the situation. Rabbi Yochanan says we're dealing with a sacrifice in the Beit Hamikdash, where the person takes the tamim animal to the Beit Hamikdash and sacrifices it. And that's why it's considered a valid sacrifice, because Rabbi Shimon also says that you need the sacrifice you need the slaughtering to actually be a good slaughtering to make the animal kosher in order for there to be liability. And Rabbi Yochanan says, and Reish Lakish says, no, you don't need to say that we're talking about going to the Beis Hamikdash. Indeed, for me, Reish Lakish, it would be a problem, because if we say that it's a tamim animal, well then you can never sell that tamim animal. And I believe Reish Lakish would say that you have to be able to, that in order for there to be liability, there has to be possible liability for either mechira, for sale, or tevicha, or slaughter. And here, with the animal that is fit to go to the Beit HaMikdash to be slaughtered, you can slaughter it, obviously. That's what you do on the Beis Hamikdash, but you cannot sell it. And so as a result, I would say that there is no liability for Dalet Vehe in that situation. And so as a result, I'm saying that when Rabbi Shimon says that we're talking about that you're Chayav Dalet Vehe, we're talking about a situation where the animal was set aside for the Beis Hamikdash and for a sacrifice, but then it got a blemish, it got a mum, and so as a result, it can now be slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash, and in that situation, it is capable of being sold, and it is capable of being slaughtered, and so Reish Lakish would say, in that situation, we're going to say that that's the situation where you're liable. So the point is that there are two teachings of Rabbi Shimon, the Tana, and then because of trying to make those two teachings of Rabbi Shimon the Tana consistent with one another, we have a machlokas of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And in that machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, we have an underlying machlokas of to what degree do we have to tie together the sale and the slaughtering. Reish Lakish says it has to be tied together completely. The only way you could ever be liable for either slaughter or sale is if you would be liable for the other. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you look at them individually. if the animal can be sold, then there's possibility of liability 4 times and 5 times for the sale of the animal. If the animal can be slaughtered, then there's going to be possibility for the 4 times and 5 times for the slaughter. But you don't have to have both the ability to sell the animal or slaughter the animal. And so that's why Rabbi Yochanan says that according to Rabbi Shimon, again, Rabbi Shimon the Tana, who says that it has to be a kosher animal, he would say that when it comes to an animal that's a treifa, you would not be able to slaughter it because if you slaughter it, it's not kosher, so you wouldn't be liable for daled v'hei. And whereas if you were to sell it, you would be liable for daled v'hei because it can be sold. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish would say, no, again, you need to be able to do either and be liable. And here, when you slaughter, you're not liable because it's not kosher. So as a result, if you were to sell a treifa, it also wouldn't be kosher. So it's important, great question to help highlight the fact that we're talking about the Tana Rebbe Shimon and two views of the Tana Rebbe Shimon, which of course both Rebbe Yochanan and Reish Lakish want to enable consistency with. And so as a result, it's within that they have their debate that we just went through.
So each one of them has an understanding of Reb Shimon the Tana in which they can establish their view, their opinion. Each one
exactly.
So each one can hold like Reb Shimon according to their interpretation of Reb Shimon.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to unpack there.
100%. That's the disadvantage of Daf Yomi is that we don't really have the time to unpack it. But it's you're absolutely right. This is this sugya, and particularly the piece that we did at the end of the day yesterday of Kol HaOmed Le is considered as if the item happened, the action happened, is one of the sugyot that is often studied in various yeshivas because of the nature of the complication and the depths in which one can take it.
Right.
Have a very wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Be well.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.